And as promised, joining me in the studios are two very special guests. Arun K. Singh, a former Indian envoy to the US, France and Israel. And with him in the studios is Amy Kasman, South Asia Bureau Chief of the Financial Times. Also joining me from New York are my colleagues Siddhant Sibal and Anas Malik. If I can go across to my colleagues in New York as we speak. Siddhant and Anas, now it's been described as the Friday blockbuster, a clash, a face-off. What should one expect from their speeches in the UNGA today? Siddhant, you go first.
Well, it's a grand finale of the Prime Minister's week-long visit, but today will be the focus, the big focus on Prime Minister's big speech, the second speech since 2014, and I expect the Indian Prime Minister to give his vision, his roadmap about his plan and how India is a solution provider, how India is a leader and India can be looked up to solve global problems, and that will be the primary focus because the Indian Prime Minister is not going to waste this opportunity at the world stage on Pakistan. He understands that Pakistan is a nuisance. We saw what happened yesterday at the SAARC meeting where Vion was present and the Pakistani Foreign Minister said that he will not enter the room till the Indian Foreign Minister finishes his statement, his speech, which shows that the juvenile behavior of the Pakistani establishment, and do expect the Pakistani Prime Minister to also indulge in that. But by and large, India's focus remains on the big picture, on India's vision to the world. In fact, if I can tell you the number of bilaterals, the Indian Prime Minister, the Indian External Affairs Minister, the junior minister in the Indian External Affairs Ministry, along with the Environment Minister who was also here, is almost 100. They met world leaders, they met their counterparts, the foreign ministers, and discussed about challenges like climate change, like terrorism, like the problem of cleanliness. These were the things which were discussed by a lecture on Gandhi, on the relevance of Gandhi, and also inaugurated the solar park which is on the roof of the building behind me, which is the United Nations headquarters. So a lot of development, a lot of output when it comes to Indian Prime Minister's week-long visit from Houston to New York, and focus clearly on making sure that to tell the world that India has arrived on the world stage as a global leader.
All right, if I can go across to my other colleague, Anas Malik in New York. Anas, what's the mood like in the Pakistani camp as we speak? Is it going to be Kashmir, Kashmir and more Kashmir?
Well, Ramesh, it is only going to be Kashmir, Kashmir and Kashmir. There is going to be a mention of the Afghan peace process and sustainable developmental goals. But by and large, Pakistani Prime Minister will be focusing on Kashmir. He's expected to make out some announcements. Yeah, last night he was at the Asia Society where he said that he would be treating the Asia Society event as net practice. I'm standing right in front of the United Nations headquarters, and right behind me is the main entrance from where all the diplomats are going and the media is going in as well. As you can see, there are people from the Pakistani Indian press that are walking in numbers, and all of them, they look forward to this face-off between the Pakistani Prime Minister and the Indian Prime Minister. What the Pakistani camp is calling is that it's fireworks at the UN. The Pakistani Prime Minister would be indulging in his known Kashmir rant, but this time he says it will be much more constructive, and he is likely to give a plan forward, a way forward, make some announcements. So what would be those announcements? Everybody is curious to know. We're yet to know what would be those announcements, but by and large the focus would be only on Kashmir. The Pakistani Foreign Minister, in fact, the whole Pakistani dispensation, they've hyped up Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan's speech, and all eyes are today on here at the United Nations, where the Pakistani Prime Minister is set to speak about 45 minutes after Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is done speaking at the UN. Yes, Ramesh.
The best analysis of global trends and the latest from the United Nations headquarters in New York.
We are at the media center in the United Nations compound.
Tracking Prime Minister Modi and getting you the Indian perspective from ground zero.
Cross-border will be another big focus of the Indian Prime Minister's speech,
bringing in minute-by-minute account of Pakistan PM Imran Khan's engagements.
Will the Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan defend his record on terrorism?
With the best team of reporters and journalists at WION's headquarters in New Delhi. Modi's UN pitch. We on rolling coverage, 5:30 p.m. IST onwards.
All right, you heard my colleagues Siddhant Sibal and Anas Malik in New York. I'm going to bring in my guests in the studio at this point in time, Ambassador Arun Singh and Amy Kasman. Ambassador Singh, my colleague from Pakistan describes the, expect fireworks when the two leaders speak. It will be early Diwali for some, I guess. But how would you put the speeches in context for the benefit of viewers who might be just tuning in?
The Indian Prime Minister's speech will clearly cover a whole range of issues, because India's effort has always been to try and show that they are not a single issue or a single country focused nation, and that they have they're a regional and global player, and they have range of global interests to play. And again, in terms of the meetings that the Prime Minister, our Foreign Minister, the Minister of State of External Affairs have had, countries across the world, with major leaders from Europe, United States. Prime Minister had a meeting with leaders from the Pacific Island countries. He had a meeting with the leaders from the Caribbean, addressed a meeting related to climate change, hosted an event about Mahatma Gandhi on renewable energy, then also addressed the issue of healthcare, Ayushman Bharat. So that will be the projection. And in that context, aside from the development agenda and efforts being made in India on social sector issues, he could certainly touch upon Afghanistan, the situation in West Asia, strategies in the Indo-Pacific, and of course the challenge of terrorism. But, it's been said that is an obsession. For India, Pakistan is an irritation, because, they keep talking about is something you have to deal with while you're dealing with other agendas, but they remain focused on one issue, one country. And if the Pakistani delegation, as Anas mentioned, is hyping up what Imran Khan is going to do, is because they need to play back to their domestic constituency that they've made a tremendous effort to try and internationalize the issue. And although they've certainly made a lot of noise, as Imran Khan himself admitted, that he is disappointed with the kind of international response he's got. Because, at the UN, most delegations are fed up with this. They're not interested. It doesn't affect their national interest. And they know that it's a game that is being played out aimed at the domestic audience. And they have to sit through it. They have to listen to it. But in terms of actual impact on the delegations, it doesn't have. The only impact it has on media from both the countries, including in Pakistan, play it back to the domestic audience, plays for him politically, and that's really the objective, to play back for his domestic audience. And aside from this noise and hue and cry, substantive terms, it doesn't mean very much.
All right. Fair point. Amy, India's envoy to the UN, Syed Akbaruddin, said not so long ago that when by they he meant Pakistan, when they go low, we soar high. So, as Ambassador Singh was pointing out, India is going to have a broad agenda when Modi speaks, but Imran Khan can be expected to focus only on Kashmir in his speech. How would you contrast, both speeches that we're going to hear very soon in the UNGA?
Look, as Ambassador Singh has just, very articulately said, there is a real desire by India to project itself as a responsible, up-and-coming global leader and a mover and shaker on the global stage that is, addressing the big issues of concern to the international community. So the last thing that they really want to get bogged down is a mud wrestling match over Kashmir. So I think that Syed Akbaruddin, who was in fact borrowing that famous line from Michelle Obama, who said, "When they go low, we go high," he is basically signaling that India wants to talk about the big global themes of big global interests. So I think some of those issues would be issues about climate change, issues about the environment, issues about the global economy, terrorism. I think Mr. Modi is likely to emphasize India a stronger economy so that it can take its rightful place on the global stage. I do think that there is likely to be some allusion to the Kashmir situation, but perhaps in an oblique way by referencing the issue of international terrorism, which is, of course, a global concern, and then portraying India as a country that's been a persistent victim of international terrorism emanating largely from its neighbor.
And taking off from where you left, Amy, now Ambassador Singh was pointing out that Imran Khan would be a very disappointed man tonight as we speak. Why? Because he did not expect to get this kind of a blank, draw a blank from the US and the UN alike. There was no pressure building up on India. The talk about mediation has come a cropper. So would you say that the mood in the Pakistani establishment as we speak would be one of disappointment more than anything else?
Yes, I think so. I mean, part of the problem for Imran Khan, who, probably would rather be focusing on fixing Pakistan's very fraught economy, making sure that Pakistan doesn't end up on the Financial Action Task Force blacklist. I mean, they have a very busy domestic agenda. But I think that, the nature of what's happened here in India and India's action over the last 2 months makes them feel that they have to do something because this has been this kind of, highly symbolic issue for them. The problem for Pakistan is they want to portray themselves as the great champion of kind of oppressed Muslims. And then at the same time, you have, Imran Khan, in fact, in an interview to my colleague, saying that he was unaware of what was happening to the Uyghurs in China. And I think Deputy Secretary of State Alice Wells very, pungently said, we wish that we would hear some more vocal concern for you. True. What is happening about the Uyghurs, who are in fact actually in large-scale concentration camps being kind of brainwashed by the Chinese government. Absolutely. And yet Imran Khan claims to know not that much about what is going on there. So I think that has so badly undermined his credibility, in terms of being a credible champion for, issues of concern, which I must say, I think there are some issues of concern. I mean, I think Absolutely. There is some concern in the international community, not necessarily about, the abrogation of Article 370 as such, but issues about the large-scale detention of, Kashmir's civil and political leaders, about the kind of communications shutdown. But, for Imran Khan to be kind of positioning himself as the champion of those issues while claiming to have no idea about people in actual concentration camps, his credibility as is somewhat undermined, I would say.
Indeed. Ambassador Singh, as Amy was pointing out, not only has the U.S. diplomat Alice Wells said in so many words that she would hope that more countries around the world, including Pakistan, speak up against the treatment or ill treatment of the Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang, China. Now, talking about the personalities of the two leaders here, Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Khan, Imran Khan is not only silent about the Uyghurs in China, he's equally silent on the treatment of minorities in Pakistan, be they Ahmadiyas, who are seen as infidels, the Shia Hazaras, Hindus, Sikhs, Christians. So he has a lot to answer for, isn't it?
Absolutely. And in fact, the discrimination against minorities, persecution of minorities in Pakistan is not something that is new.
It's well documented as well.
That plus if you look at the numbers of the minority community in Pakistan at the time of independence and their percentage of the population, and you compare that to today, basically over a period of time they've been compelled to leave the country. So, as Amy said, based on the principles of the issue, clearly they have no leg to stand on. But, this is all about politics. And again, the approach they take to Xinjiang shows the double standards there. But going beyond that, I think one other distinction that you need to have is that Prime Minister Modi has been elected by a significant majority in India, commands support in the Indian Parliament. In the case of Imran Khan, it is widely accepted that it is the Pakistan army that has orchestrated what many describe as the selection of Imran Khan as the Prime Minister. And he is not really the person who is the most powerful. And you may have seen recent images of there's been flooding in some areas that Pakistan controls. And there it is the army chief who was doing the survey and waving to people. So, and then he's also present in the Economic Council of the government. So essentially it is the army that runs that country, and Imran Khan is a civilian face that they have put on for the moment to put all the blame on him and to show as if Pakistan has a facade of democracy and let him deal with the civilian leaders in other countries. So that is the additional gap in credibility that they are struggling with.
Mr. Singh and Amy, do hold your thoughts. I want to take our viewers to New York as we speak. As Imran Khan would push his Kashmir agenda at the United Nations General Assembly, scores of Baloch and Pashtuns will protest outside the venue against human rights abuses in Pakistan. We get you this report from the protest site. Take a look.
Well, I'm standing right at the 2nd Avenue where the protest site is, where all the protests take place. And right behind me is the exact place where the protest today would be taking place when the Pakistani Prime Minister goes on a Kashmir rant. Right in front of me, if my camera person can show you as well, is that very UN headquarters, the United Nations building as well, where the Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan and the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be speaking respectively. Around the time when the Pakistani Prime Minister will be speaking, a huge number of Baloch activists, Pashtun activists, human rights activists would be protesting at this point, right, that is to my right, and they would be protesting in numbers against the human rights violation in Pakistan as we speak. So Imran Khan is going to be given a tough opposition. The New York Police Department has deployed about 1,000 police personnel that would be deployed within this 750-meter patch that is of 2 blocks to control those protesters, so that they to basically avert any untoward incident. But that one thing that is for sure, that Imran Khan will be given a tough time right outside the UN as he speaks inside.
All eyes on the UNGA. Prime Minister Modi addresses the world body. A face-off likely with Imran Khan.
We can't attack India.
नफरत को ही अपनी राजनीति का केंद्र बना दिया है.
The biggest platform,
The tallest leader.
and the most extensive coverage.
Watch history in the making. Only on Beyond. World is One.
All right, you're watching the continuous coverage here on Beyond World is One of Prime Minister Modi's address to the United Nations General Assembly, which will happen in just a few minutes from now. But going back to my guest in the studio, Amy, there we saw the report from New York where protests are likely to take place by the Baloch and the Pashtuns against the Pakistan government's policies against the minorities. Now, from your vantage, your perspective, how do you think the world should address this issue in particular? We spoke about the Uyghurs in China, but what about the Pakistani minorities inside Pakistan?
Look, I mean, I think the issue of minority protection is an issue in all countries. I really don't want to, I think in every country there are issues of how minorities are treated. I don't think necessarily, in Pakistan it may be a serious problem. I think it's not the only country that's a serious problem. So I think that every country needs to, including my own, I would be very happy to say, needs to examine the issue of, minority protection and how minorities are treated and equal treatment and discrimination. I think these are very, very serious issues, and we shouldn't just, that every country needs to examine, every diverse and heterogeneous country needs to examine in itself and to kind of say, oh, why aren't we looking at this? I'm not going to engage in that.
Sure. Ambassador Singh, help our viewers understand where the two leaders are coming from, Prime Ministers Modi and Khan. This would be Prime Minister Modi's second UNGA speech. His first was in 2014. This is his second. At the same time, he's coming from a position of strength because he's just won a re-election. India's economy is doing reasonably well. On the other hand, in contrast, Pakistan's economy is not doing well. Inflation is high, the growth is low. There's always a problem of IMF bailout and the FATF threat to blacklist Pakistan. So help our viewers understand where the two leaders are coming from as we look forward to their speeches at the UNGA tonight.
So I'd be more comfortable if generally and in our own minds we stopped equating ourselves with Pakistan.
Sure.
Or just trying to do this juxtaposition.
Sure.
Because Pakistan is nowhere near India's level. I mean, it creates, as I mentioned, certain amount of irritation for India with all the noise it makes. It poses some challenges to us through the use of terrorism, non-state actors. But if you look at Pakistan's size, if you look at their economy, the kind of trouble they're in and the size of the economy, really, they're not at India's level. And we need to look at India more in its wider global context. And I think one contrast between 2014 and today would be the kind of international engagements that India is doing. And for example, Prime Minister Modi met President Trump, and this is their 4th meeting in 3 months.
Right.
This is very unusual. It's a signal of how US is assessing India. There was a meeting of the Quad, Japan, India, Australia, United States at the foreign minister level. This is the first time that has happened. Again, the meeting he's had with the CARICOM and Pacific. And if you look at his bilateral meetings, large number of countries. So I think India's standing globally between 2014 and now has changed dramatically. Whereas as far as Pakistan is concerned, the challenge of terrorism remains, their economic challenge remains, the domination of army and politics remain. The only change that has happened is that today the United States needs Pakistan in the context of Afghanistan. The kind of pressure that the United States was putting on Pakistan on the subject of terrorism, for the moment that pressure is not there. So Pakistan has a little bit of breathing room, but if they are not able to effectively deliver on some kind of a reconciliation between the Taliban and the United States, very soon the language from the United States will be different. The kind of pressure they're subjected to will be different. So we have to just wait and see how this process plays out.
All right, so as Ambassador Singh said, there's more to the UNGA address than just Pakistan. There's climate change, there's terrorism, there's sustainable development, there's clean energy. So let's focus on climate change to begin with. Now, India is among those countries that are taking decisive action on climate change. Let's understand how the country is combating the issue. Now, take a look at the next report. Now, India's National Action Plan on Climate Change has 8 missions. The missions focus on solar power, enhanced energy efficiency and sustainable habitat, and also water conservation and sustaining the Himalayan ecosystem. The plan includes the Green India mission and calls for a switch to sustainable agriculture and promotion of strategic knowledge for climate change. A key focus of India's climate action plan is on the solar mission. To encourage the use of solar energy, Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurated the Gandhi Solar Park at the United Nations headquarters in New York. The aim is to increase reliance on non-fossil fuel by the year 2022 and non-renewable energy use in compliance with the Paris Climate Agreement. Now, the country is also mulling a nationwide ban on single-use plastic. The ban is set to be enforced on the 2nd of October this year, and the country aims to end single-use plastic by 2022. The plan includes replacing poly bags with alternatives such as paper. Now, lastly is an ambitious plan of introducing electric vehicles, and India has already embarked on the mission with an aim to combat vehicular pollution. The government plans to replace diesel fuel vehicles with e-vehicles as part of the mission. Electric chargers will be installed every 25 kilometers. The government plans to launch state-run e-buses as well. The goods and services tax on electric vehicles has also been reduced. In fact, earlier this year, India flagged off the world's first diesel to electric converted locomotive. All right, if I can bring my guest, Amy Casman, back in the discussion. Amy, we've seen something very peculiar happen at the UNGA this year. The climate debate is essentially being driven by children. Now, Greta Thunberg is a good example of that. So your thoughts on India's contribution to climate action and the world and where the world stands today as we speak?
So look, first of all, I think, it's very, very laudable that India is really adopting all these very ambitious goals and targets to try to usher in a greener future. India is one of the countries that is, in fact, most vulnerable if these kind of worst fears of climate change are realized. This is a country where a huge percent of the population is still basically dependent on the monsoon rain for its well-being and livelihood. And so if climate change disrupts these patterns, I mean, India is going to have a huge problem in terms of people being affected. And we're already seeing what seem to be early warning signs of climate change with these kind of, there's lots of drought. Right. There's been successive years of drought in the last few years. They've had the hottest summers on record. Then there's been floods. I mean, very erratic and difficult weather patterns, bringing a lot of difficulties to the common people. So India, as a country that is in fact acutely vulnerable to changing global climate, it's really good that they are laying out such ambitious goals and targets. I think that the challenge will be to try to turn these very ambitious goals and high-minded ideas into actual reality and ensure that, okay, the government can announce this ban, but making sure that it really happens and that, things really go away. And because I remember at some point Delhi banning plastic bags some time ago, but I know that when I go shopping, the shopkeeper is still handing me these plastic bags. So I think the challenge for India will be to ensure that the implementation of these things, is that there's actually a realistic plan to make the thing work. The broad goal is ambitious and laudable, but how are you going to make sure that it is real and happens? And that's what I think we're not very clear about so far.
Sure. And talking about the environment and climate action in New York, the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi reiterated his support to stop the use of single-use plastic. Beyond World is One's brings you an exclusive report on steps taken by UN to avoid plastic bottle use.
Climate change, we know, has been at the front and center of India's agenda at the United Nations General Assembly. The Prime Minister has taken a leadership position on that, and he's spoken about sustainable development and climate action at home as well. He's talking about giving up the use of single-use plastic. When the conversation begins at the United Nations, the change too must begin here, and that is one of the first things that we noticed as we entered. This behind me is the media center, and one of the first things that we noticed is something that you would call the future of packaged drinking water. This is what we came with. This is the kind of bottles that we're used to. This is how we consume packaged water, but none of it here at the UN. What we find is this. This is boxed water. It says boxed water is better. And then it goes on to say that this is sustainable, pure and thoughtful. It talks about sustainability. We are an alternative to plastic bottles. This box is made from paper, which is truly a renewable resource. This is one option. The second is this, and this is very, very interesting. It's called Ever and Ever, and the pitch for this bottle of water is most interesting, I have to say. The message here reads, and I'm going to read it out to you. Hello again. Does this bottle look familiar? That's because you've seen it before. Actually, you've seen it over and over again, thanks to people who recycle. Nearly 75% of all aluminium ever made is still in use today. This bottle can be an ode to aluminium, it says, a love letter to the everlasting metal that has been around for approximately forever and will be around for approximately another forever, taking whatever shape humans require of it, silently, selflessly, without ego or waste. Aluminium never leaves your side. This really is an ode to aluminium and perhaps the future of how you will consume water. So the next time you reach out for a plastic bottle, think about the alternatives that are already available in the market.
All right, it's getting to 6:40 p.m. India time, and I want to remind the viewers that you're watching the continuous coverage here on Beyond World is One of the much-anticipated speech by Prime Minister Modi at the United Nations General Assembly session. All right, to introduce my guest joining me right now is Ambassador Anil Trigunath, who joins us from New Delhi. Ambassador Trigunath, good to have you join us on Beyond World is One. Now, many people are waiting in anticipation for Prime Minister Modi's speech at the UNGA. Your thoughts on what to expect from his speech, followed by that by the Pakistani Premier as well?
Well, as you know, Ramesh, the trend has already been set by Prime Minister from Houston onwards.
Right.
That he's going to mainly focus, in my view, on India's developmental journey, what this government has achieved, and how it wishes to take India into at the highest pedestal, making it one of the most attractive destinations for investments, and green investments, so to say. You were just talking about the climate change, and I must say the action has already begun. In the renewable energy, they have already said, so we can hear quite a bit on India's developmental path, as well as metrics, as well as the reforms that have been conducted, how the government has been doing all that he will talk about. He will also talk about climate change, I'm quite sure, once again. And I feel that on the global terrorism, he will speak significantly, once again urging the world to sign the Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism. He may not necessarily speak about Pakistan, and I think he should not, because Pakistan should not be able to bring us down to their level under whatever circumstances. So I believe that the Prime Minister will focus on all the key challenges that are going to in a global way. And as we know, that India has been on the forefront of climate change, fight against climate change, and has been a leader in the formation of International Solar Alliance, has already started renewable energy. So energy, development and democracy, all these are very strong ingredients for a greener development, and that's what he'll focus about. And of course, for all this to happen, you need to somehow contain any terrorist acts, especially coming from across the border. So he may not refer to Pakistan, whereas you mentioned about Imran Khan's speeches thereafter, and we can only see his unifocal approach, only talking about, because he has not yielded him any traction whatsoever. They have been talking in almost every single fora ever since Article 370 was abrogated. They have gone out, they have been unsuccessful in every single fora. And therefore it is a last chance. So we can only hear from him the same old racketeering narrative, and which has been discounted by the world. So they are trying to focus on some kind of a human rights violation, lack of communications and things like that. But that means nothing. The world does not buy these kind of fake arguments which are being put out by Pakistan. So I think that even if they make some direct challenges, I believe that it will be answered at a junior level by one of our officers.
Sure. So in addition to climate change, Amy, terrorism can be expected to figure prominently in Prime Minister Modi's speech at least. Now, as Ambassador Trigunai was pointing out there, he spoke about the CCIT, the Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism, which was, by the way, mooted by India way back in 1996, much before the world came to know about the 9/11 attacks, by the way. And yet we have seen little or no progress on this front. Why? Because there's no consensus on the definition of terrorism. Why so?
I mean, that is a huge question that, gets into...
Isn't it ironical that we are, even after 23 years, we are still quibbling over semantics, over the definition of terrorism, when everybody around the world, including in India, know, and they've seen it happen in front of their very own eyes?
I guess, even we as journalists face this problem. There's endless debates in newsroom, who should be called a terrorist, who is a militant, who's an armed guerrilla. So, you are supporting some non-state actor and, think their cause is... it's an endless circle and debate. I think that rather than labeling, of course there are conventions, groups are labeled, the UN has a process for deeming people terrorist entities. I think what's clear is that it's by the actions that, a terrorist is defined rather than by the cause, I think is really something. But it is it's obviously an issue that the global community has found hard to wrestle with, because many states, do actually support non-state actors in countries to which they are opposed, and so that becomes the very tricky problem.
Sure. All right, we're just barely less than an hour away from the much anticipated speech by Prime Minister Modi at the UNGA, and you're watching the continuous coverage here on Beyond World is One of that very speech, and we are counting down to Prime Minister Modi's speech at the UNGA. Now, talking about terrorism, as Prime Minister Modi's week-long visit to the United States comes to an end, one thing that clearly emerges is the following. His focus was on countering terrorism and extremist narratives as the global platform. Now, calling for a global solidarity and readiness against terrorism, Modi urged the world leaders to come together to combat terrorism. While hailing the scrapping of Article 370, Modi slammed Pakistan for its support for terrorism. He launched a stinging attack on Pakistan, saying that the plotters of 26/11 and 9/11 were found in Pakistan. Modi also called for a definitive move against terror during the Howdy Modi event, as he asked the audience at the NRD Stadium in Houston to give a standing ovation to Donald Trump for his determination to fight terrorism. And US President Donald Trump lauded Modi's fight against Pakistan, saying that he gave a loud and clear message to them. In a veiled dig at China, Modi pitched for avoiding politicization in UN listings, saying that terrorists should not be allowed to get funds and arms and ammunition. He suggested institutionalizing counter-terrorism cooperation at the multilateral level. Siddharth and Anas, now it's been described as the Friday blockbuster, a clash, a face-off. What should one expect from their speeches in the UNGA today?
The Indian Prime Minister is not going to waste this opportunity at the world stage on Pakistani.
It is only going to be Kashmir, Kashmir and Kashmir.
All right, you're watching the coverage here on Beyond World is One. We are counting down to Prime Minister Modi's speech at the UNGA, and I have with me two very special guests still with me. In the studio is Amy Kasbin, South Asia Bureau Chief of Financial Times, and Ambassador Anant Raghunath joining us from New Delhi. Ambassador Raghunath, if I can come to you now. Now, contrast for us the two leaders here, Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Khan. Now, Imran Khan is having to contend with a teetering economy. There's a pressure from the IMF and the FATF. On the other hand, Prime Minister Modi is coming from a re-election, and this is only his second address to the UNGA. So contrast their two personalities for the benefit of viewers and what to expect from them in their respective speeches as well.
Well, Ramesh, you have already outlined the great characteristics of Prime Minister Modi, but let me say they are non-comparable today, except in name they both are Prime Ministers. Prime Minister Modi is an international figure. He is respected. He has launched initiatives globally and domestically. He comes as one of the most strongest Prime Minister India has ever seen, with a thundering majority both in the Parliament and in the state elections. He has changed the narrative in India to a greater development. He has a vision. He has a global vision, and he thinks big. And these are the things that are, and he's not just confining himself to a national or a regional plane. He is talking about the global issues, global problems. On the contrary, when we see Pakistani Prime Minister, we know that he has been more or less propped up by the army there during the elections. One has seen already. He has a limited possibility of doing anything, and I hear from commentaries that the army is not too happy with his performance, as they have not been able to find any traction on Kashmir. Besides, they have been only very, very myopic, because they only believe in an India-centric policy, and that too a Kashmir-centric policy. If you see the Foreign Minister Jaishankar, he spoke at the CFR, and he said that even if they had the Kashmir, they will still try to attack India, and that is a problem with Pakistan, because they do not have a democracy in the country. Prime Minister Modi represents the largest democracy in the world.
Right.
It is, and we know what kind of state Pakistan is, and more importantly, Pakistan is a haven of terrorists. And you can see the Prime Minister Imran Khan's government requesting for a UN designated terrorist, Hafiz Saeed, to be given a monthly allowance out of that, which shows their total complicity. So he is in fact reigning over a non-state rather than a proper state, in my view. So there is no comparison between Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Imran Khan. Secondly, I would like to say that India has to desist from giving any due attention to Pakistan anymore. I have always believed in this, that Pakistan does not deserve. They only want to bring India down to their level. It is not, India should not even react to what it. And if Prime Minister Modi does not refer to Pakistan in his speech, so much the better. That clearly shows that we have moved on both bilaterally, regionally and globally. And so there is, in my view, no comparison. between a leader like Prime Minister Modi and his counterpart in Pakistan.
Right, so ignore Pakistan, says Ambassador Trigunath, and ignoring Pakistan here in the studio as well. Now, as Pakistan continues to rant on the issue of Jammu and Kashmir at the United Nations General Assembly, India has established itself as a global leader with Prime Minister Narendra Modi's big investment pitch in the United States. Now, take a look at the following visuals. Business was India's top priority as Modi continued to pitch India as an investment hub. Modi started with his address to the Bloomberg Global Business Forum in New York. He pushed for investments in India as he addressed the gathering of world leaders and top corporate executives. He said that India is set to achieve its target of becoming a $5 trillion economy. Listen in.
अब भारत ने एक बड़ा लक्ष्य रखा है, देश को $5 ट्रिलियन की इकोनॉमी बनाने का। साथियों, जब 2014 में हम सरकार में आए थे, तो देश की इकोनॉमी करीब करीब $2 ट्रिलियन के आसपास थी। बीते 5 वर्षों में हमने इसमें लगभग $1 ट्रिलियन जोड़ दिया और अब हम कमर कसकर $5 ट्रिलियन के लक्ष्य को प्राप्त करने के लिए काम कर रहे हैं। फ्रेंड्स, इस बड़े टारगेट को अचीव करने के लिए हमारे पास कैपेबिलिटी भी है, करेज भी है और कंडीशंस भी हमारे साथ है। आज भारत की ग्रोथ स्टोरी के 4 अहम फैक्टर हैं जो एक साथ दुनिया में मिलने वाली शायद ये रेयरेस्ट ऑफ द रेयर कॉम्बिनेशन है। ये 4 फैक्टर हैं: डेमोक्रेसी, डेमोग्राफी, डिमांड एंड डिसिसिवनेस।
All right, there you heard Prime Minister Modi speak at the Global Business Forum in New York. Amy, I want you to come in here now. Then we heard Prime Minister Modi address the business leaders in New York. Now, taking cue from where Ambassador Trigunath left, he says, ignore Pakistan, don't give much credence to what Pakistan says or does. So from your vantage, talking about trade in particular, Prime Minister Modi said, told the business leaders that it's a golden opportunity for them to invest in India, that he will personally act as a bridge between them and the Indian government and the Indian bureaucracy, and that data is the new goal. So your thoughts on Prime Minister Modi's investment pitch in New York, focusing on other issues besides just South Asian issues such as Pakistan or Kashmir?
Look, I mean, it's very clear that Prime Minister Modi is very, very eager to attract more foreign investment to India. And in fact, the world is also, you know, looking at India with interest and, you know, and they want India to be a good place to invest because there's a lot of money looking for investment, you know, a place to go, a place to earn returns. So I think the question is whether the realities of doing business in India really live up to the pitch. Again, Mr. Modi is making all the right noises. And, I mean, right now part of the problem also is that right now is a very turbulent time in the world economy. You have this situation of rising U.S.-China trade tensions, and a lot of companies are looking to diversify and move out of China and find alternative bases to manufacture and use as a base to export back to the U.S., which is putting high tariffs on goods from China. The problem is that actually India in reality is playing catch-up. A lot of investment has already moved out of China, but the beneficiaries of that exodus has not been India so far. India's exports in August contracted by 6%. Exports out of countries like Vietnam and Bangladesh have surged by double digits. So India actually has to really look at what are the real issues, why this investment hasn't been coming. And it's great that Mr. Modi is making the pitch and sending the right noises, but there again has to be a lot of real looking at the realities of the on-the-ground situation. Because right now, India, I mean, an economist described it to me as a once-in-a-century opportunity to land large quantities of the very kind of manufacturing investment that Modi has been talking about actually since the beginning of his first term. The Make in India campaign was unveiled in 2014. Right. But actually, so far, it hasn't really taken off. And it's actually Make in Vietnam and Make in Bangladesh which is happening. So they really need to look at the realities. So make the right noises, but also follow up.
All right, follow up, says Amy Casbin. Time for a very short break here on Beyond World is One. Don't go anywhere. You're watching the continuous coverage here on Beyond World is One of Prime Minister Modi's much anticipated speech at the UNGA.